Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. It's just after 10:40 in the morning. We're continuing our tour of the FY26 budget with the Agency of Natural Resources. And up next, we have the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. So welcome. And if you would, the two of you would introduce yourselves, please, and then we'll take on your budget. Thank you.
Great. Good morning. For the record, I'm Danielle. You can call me Danny Fitzko. I'm the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Recreation.
I'm Nancy Blimmer. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And I think, I want to move to the next slide. I think we'll follow a pretty similar sort of flow as what the other departments in the Secretary's office has done. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of FPR and our team and sort of the high level work that we do, an overview of our budget, some key changes, some significant initiatives and challenges. And if you want to get into the weeds, we have our budget development form.
Okay, so about 11:15.
Yes, I probably not, but we'll happy to take any questions and
Okay,
and we'll follow up anywhere needed. So FPRs really follow suit with our names. We're forests. We really think about the health, integrity, and sustainably managing our forests. We're Southern Vermont is 76% forested. We like to say we're forest strong. We're also state parks. We make memories and brought in over 1 million visitors during the operating season this year. So pretty incredible resource we have in the state. And we're outdoor recreation, promoting diversification and really increased demands of outdoor recreation. Not only are we promoting, but we're helping to manage it sustainably. Our next slide sort of goes over sort of our high-level organizational structure. One person that's not here today is Kate Eberly. She's our principal assistant, but she's really our legislative affairs and communications lead. And you'll probably, I wish she was here, but she had a sick kid this morning, and I get that. Mine was yesterday. But she's here a lot. So if you ever have any questions about FPR, you can just grab her in the halls. But we have really 3 programmatic divisions. We have a division of forests, which is led by Oliver Pearson. We have our state parks, which is led by Nate McKean, lands administration and recreation led by Becca Washburn, and then our business office led by the amazing Ainsley here. We have about 135 year-round staff, and then we really blow up in the summertime with the operations of our state parks, bringing on about 450 seasonals, which itself is insane to be able to bring on each year. The operations of our state parks is like opening and closing a business every year. But we like to look at bringing those seasonals on as an opportunity to try Vermont. We bring a lot of people in from out of state. They come, they stay often. So it's we really look at it as a great opportunity as workforce development in the state. I'll just briefly kind of go over the work of our 3 programmatic divisions. Forestry has about 8 programs in it. You probably don't see them as much because they're hanging out in the woods, but we have everything from a forest health team that monitors the health of our forests. They get up in a plane every year looking for any issues. We have a small wildland fire team, which is, we're starting to build capacity there, just recognizing the increased risk. And I'm sure you noticed this past fall, it was pretty intense fire season for us, and we actually responded to 9 fires to support local communities. We have a private lands program that works with private landowners. 80% of our forests is owned by private landowners, so they administer the use value appraisal program or current use. We have a watershed forestry program, and we have a forest economy program, really thinking about supporting businesses in the state. And then we have an urban and community forestry program. And if you look around Montpelier, that's really the trees and green in our downtown areas. Our state parks, we have 55 state parks across the state in many rural areas. We like to think there's a state park within 20 minutes of every Vermonter. People don't recognize it. I think it's because it's so dispersed, but there's $280 million of infrastructure assets within Vermont state parks. So that's a really huge maintenance and upkeep that we need. And the amount of contracts and invoices that we do to manage our state parks. I think we had over 150 different vendors or contractors that we worked with last year. So we're putting rural Vermonters to work all across the state. And I think we processed 12,000 invoices last year. So you can imagine all the ice that we buy, and I say toilet paper a lot. I mean, it's a lot.
Brett Flivers.
So, and I know you're contracting a lot of that. BGS, how much does BGS do for you?
Well, certainly we work a lot with BGS. They set up sort of a lot of framework that we work within. So if it's really a big contract, we work directly with BGS, and they also have some standard contracts, the procurement contracts in place that we use, but we do a lot in-house ourselves. I think, can you, what?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
300 individual contracts for
Yeah.
the department.
It's quite a bit.
And that doesn't actually include umbrella contracts, which is a big portion of our work as well.
Yeah,
BGS helps you buy stuff or
they have contracts that we work in.
procurement, yeah.
Yeah, if it doesn't work with BGS, then we set it up ourselves, and we're really trying to be like, we talked about umbrella contracts where we can set up the contracts ahead of time and then write POs against it, which helps us move faster. And then our last programmatic team is Lands Administration, Outdoor Recreation. It's a land conservation arm for us. They help support the planning of our and like land records for state lands, Agency of Natural Resources stewards over 370,000 acres of state lands. And they also, as our recreation arm, when we give a lot of grants out to municipalities and nonprofits, and then sort of support that long-term vision for the state. So that's FPR. This slide sort of gives you a high-level overview of where our funding goes by programs. The biggest bucket you'll see is state parks at about 19 million. And then lands administration is the second, which has our land conservation in there. There's been a lot of federal funding coming through to help us acquire lands, whether it's going to be going to our state lands portfolio or easements where we'll manage them on private lands. The big bucket of outdoor recreation is really a lot of pass-through. We have federal funding that we pass through to municipalities and nonprofits. And then the sort of the bottom corner there is really all the different forestry buckets, from forest health, forestry operations is going to be our state lands work, urban and community forestry. So that's sort of just a breakdown of where our money goes to support by program area. I think I'm going to pass it to Ansley now, give you some of the dollar details.
So the total FPR budget for FY 26 is 54,842 and 653, which is an increase of $7.1 million over FY 25. Just north of 1.5 of that is general fund dollars, and the rest is spread across federal, special and interdepartmental funds. So general fund, the increase is primarily comprised of an increase in benefits, which is about $678,000. Other general fund increases are due to staff salary increases, and internal service funds, overhead and fixed costs. And as every year, also inflation. Federal, which I also have another slide, we'll dive a little bit deeper into federal, but our federal funds are an increase of close to 4 million, primarily due to new U.S. Forest Service and NBRC, so Northern Borders Regional Commission awards. But we also have an increased core funding with our Federal Highway Administration, our Rec Trails program. Our expenditure increases are associated with land transactions, and an increase in subrecipient awards.
So question there, are you having any trouble drawing down your federal funds?
U.S. Forest Service has been behind before the change of administration. So we still have some outstanding draws from previous.
That you haven't drawn down or they haven't paid?
They haven't paid.
Okay, because I know they've laid off like 3,000 people.
Even,
Yeah.
Less.
yeah.
On their sort of team, so our BIL and IRA dollars are frozen right now. There's a 90-day freeze on those, and we do have substantial dollars
Tell us
associated.
what those two are again. You're using acronyms that I don't.
Sorry, Infrastructure Reduction Act and the Bilateral Infrastructure Law.
Oh, so you have some frozen?
Yes, we do.
What are those for? What are you?
We have some that help us implement our forest action plan, which is a vision for managing and supporting our forests for the state. So, and we get those on a yearly basis over 5 years. There's also funds to support forest health, invasive species control. But then we got two larger grants that will, which we haven't actually called in yet, basically to support resilient forests in the state, working with private landowners. How do we develop resilient strategies so landowners can, and support like invasive species management, thinking about forest complexity, with also a nod to the forest product sector, so that we're creating forests that will help produce products into the future. That's about $5.5 million that we are not able
That's that
to.
one.
Yeah, between the two. One's 500,000 and one's 5 million, 5 million. It's also meant to support underserved landowners, which is a lot of Vermont.
Culverts, bridges, that sort of stuff coming out of that money too?
Not as much on that money, but we have other dollars. We just actually received another federal grant that's also associated with this at-risk funding that would support like train mats and culverts and bridges, all to help protect water quality during forestry operations.
Yeah, so looking at this budget overview that you have on the screen, it looks like about an 18% increase in the personnel services line. Is that some new positions, and if so, what are they for?
The increase is actually primarily we have two new
Two.
DLAR positions. We only have two new positions.
From last fiscal year to this fiscal year, and they are to support grants, which are recreation grants through Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we got federal dollars to help support those two positions. And the rest is really just the increase in staffing costs with healthcare.
Yeah, but 18% is high. I mean,
Yeah, they're
that's
big.
not- I mean, there is, the 6.5% pay act and, obviously retirement, healthcare, but 18% overall is high. That's why I'm flagging it.
Sure. And so in Vantage, our budgeting system, personnel services includes contracts. And we have a significant increase in contracts this year. So when you're seeing personnel services, it's salaries, benefits, and contracts. So it's primarily contracts.
That helps.
Yeah, like I'm looking at it too, and I'm like, oh, right.
No, and
It's a funny-
And down below, you have, almost a $4 million increase in federal funds, which offsets a lot of that, but I'm just, okay, it's not all personnel.
No, it includes contracts.
I think I needed that too, so thank you.
It's always fun to look at. So
So the two positions to help support the grant, or does the grant money fund the two positions?
Yeah. It's a combination, but it's all like federal funds matched together to support the two positions.
Thank you.
Yep.
So our special funds, it would appear that our park special fund is a decrease. However, we budgeted $1.2 million in FY25 for a landing craft, which is a boat. So the park special fund is actually an increase of $550,000. And parks expenses have soared exponentially. I've just recently did an analysis of our expenditures, which have increased 34% over the last 5 years for parks.
Because
Inflation, increased energy costs. At some points, it was because I think it's mostly inflation. And our contract expenses have rose quite exponentially. Other special funds have also slightly increased due to strategic investment in Land Facilities Trust Fund, and then also planned spending from our Lands Acquisition Fund. Our interdepartmental fund has also increased. We have a new MOU with ACCD for $1 million for 3 projects. So that's why you're going to see a big increase in our interdepartmental funds.
so one of the projects,
I can tell you the project.
Like I got it written down, but I don't know them.
So it's the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. They have an Economic Development Authority grant. We'll be receiving over the course of the grant about $2 million for 3 projects to increase outdoor recreation. One is Bigham Falls in Stowe. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's a beautiful waterfall with a lot of people accessing it. And so the funds will be to help improve the trails, the parking, toilet facility, signage. It's one of those places that's loved greatly, and we need to increase the infrastructure to support the visitation. Another one is we will be rehabbing 2 out of the 8 fire towers that are on state lands. We've done an assessment and they're fantastic now recreational resources and they need improvements for safety and general upkeep and also maintain the historic preservation. And the last project is the Smuggler's Notch Gateway, where that also is heavily visited by Vermonters and tourists, and improving parking, improving stormwater management and access to the trail network there.
Is that on the Stowe side?
It is on the Stowe side.
You said earlier that your state parks are doing a lot more business, right?
Yeah, state parks has seen a 41% increase over the past 6 years. I will say the past 2 years, we've hit over 1 million visitors the past couple of years, which is fantastic. But even with hits from the floods the past 2 years, I mean, we had one of our most busiest parks closed all of last year, Camp Plymouth, and then the parks around Groton were hit. So while we're seeing great increase, it's not necessarily keeping up with the costs.
Well, yeah, but what I'm suggesting is that because you get more volume, you expect your operational costs to go up.
That's true. I mean, it's just, I was talking to one of our parks people the other day, and they're like, to remove trash from Maidstone State Park has now gone to $40,000 a year. So it's just, those types of increases are real. Personnel costs, all of our firewood costs, that we try and harvest where we can, but we buy a lot of firewood. So it's an overall just increase in the management and services of our state park system.
The next slide, we do a little bit of a deeper dive in our federal funds. Federal funds make up 33% of our budget. Our federal funders are U.S. Forest Service, Land Water Conservation Fund, Federal Highway Administration, Northern Border Regional Commission, and we also have ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funds, and then FEMA funds from the last two FY 23 and FY 24, I guess FY 24 and FY 25 floods. So we have about 50 million in federal awards. Of that, 38 million is unexpended. We currently have 147 subrecipient awards, so awards that we grant out, and have about 5.5 million that's still outstanding.
And plans for the rest of the money to be spent?
We're trying to spend as quickly as we can and draw down as quickly as we can, but many of these are 3 to 5 year grants, so they take time to actually implement. We certainly meet with our federal partners regularly, certainly right now, and there's still a lot of questions to be answered all around.
Thanks.
This slide kind of gives you some key budget changes. Some of these we've already talked about. We've talked about Vermont State Parks and sort of the overall increase that we're seeing in just the operational costs. We also talked about the Economic Development Authority funds and investments in 3 access areas on state lands. We're also seeing an increase in clean water funding in primarily 2 areas. We receive clean water funds so we can support for clean water during forestry operations, and we do that with a lot of times with purchasing like portable skidder bridges. And we got an increase in funds. So it turns out that those larger steel portable skidder bridges come in very handy during and after a flood when municipalities could really use them. So we have loaned out some of the skidder bridges to municipalities. So we're going to increase our inventory. So we have them to give out to logging operations, but we'll also be able to provide it if municipalities need it, hopefully not in the future. But we also do best management practices on our 600 miles of state roads on state lands. And so we're increasing sort of funds for implementation of those practices on state lands. And then the last one sort of highlights some of the federal awards that we're seeing that potentially are at risk, that $5.5 million that I talked about, which are Inflation Reduction Act funding for resilience forestry of the private landowners, and then a little over $2 million in federal awards from Land and Water Conservation Funds, which is really about outdoor recreation, and federal highway funds as also recreational funds. We haven't heard too much on those. They seem much more stable.
The 2.2 million.
Yeah, the Land and Water Conservation Fund was actually in law sort of said that, well, I know things can change, but it's appropriated in federal statute, not statute, federal law.
So it seems okay for now.
Yeah.
In the last couple of weeks, we've been able to draw down close to $900,000 from Land Water Conservation Fund as well.
Okay.
Just kind of giving you a highlight of some of the work that we're doing, some significant initiatives. All three of our divisions have just recently completed some large, like long-term strategic planning efforts that we're working on implementing. We had the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. This was actually requested by the General Assembly in 2022, that recognized forest product sector was suffering, recognizing workforce challenges, the cost of doing business is going up. So they asked us to create a 10-year vision to support a thriving forest products sector going forward. We've now delivered that plan last March, and we have an implementation steering committee, actually that just met this morning. So a lot of work going into sort of thinking about how we support the health of our forests all the way to sort of the end user and buying sort of products. Parks did a modernization study last year. And I should just let you know that we are in the 100th year celebration of Vermont State Parks. We're celebrating it till April, so happy birthday to State Parks. And that was a really great study to help us think about what does it look like for maybe not the next 100 years, but the next 10 years going forward. And four key areas came up. One was to think about how do we make state parks more accessible and inclusive, ADA accessible, and with language access, just overall thinking about who's coming to Vermont State Parks. Also thinking about climate going forward, we are impacted by the changes in the extreme weather. We've had several parks that were impacted, but also what could we do in our operations and facilities to make us reduce our footprint. Also thinking about how do we fund state parks, some ideas of like, can we offer more dynamic pricing? Like it's a holiday weekend, do we raise the prices to be more dynamic? We set our prices through rules. And then the last one is staffing. We bring on a lot of people, which is great. Looking at other states, it's a different sort of balance of more year-round staff as opposed to seasonal staff. And how do we sort of bridge that shoulder season? Because seasonal staff is sort of capped at 7 months. But if we want to extend the season, people still come. We may not provide services, but people are still coming and they want more services. So we have those sort of 4 key areas that we're working on. And then just last week, we launched Move Forward Vermont Together, which is really about Vermont outdoor recreation going forward. 3 key pillars here, thinking about stewardship of our trails and the people that manage them and care for them. Wellness, how do we mental and physical health and welcoming people, and then also economic development. I mean, outdoor recreation in Vermont is a huge driver. We're number 2 in the country for GDP, just behind Hawaii. It's 4.6% for Vermont, so it's a huge economic driver. State lands planning and management is another area that is significant sort of challenges for us because we have such a large infrastructure that we're managing on state parks, and then the broader outside of designated state parks. It's a important body of work, public lands, but it takes a lot of resources and we're limited. And at the same time, we're thinking about Act 59. I've probably heard about it. It's a 30 by 30, 50 by 50 conservation bill. We're heavily invested in that. I wanted to flag our business office improvements. It is the heartbeat, the circulatory system of our organization. We were underwater for years, and we've really invested in increasing our staffing and our ability in our business office. If we can't get the money in or out or pay bills, it matters. And Ainsley has really led that initiative, which is fantastic. We've also just preparing for some new state enterprise updates with new procurement system and potentially some ERP technology. And then lastly, we certainly have had to respond to several extreme weather events. As you know, the 2003 and 2024 storm were hit hard for our state lands, state parks, and also broader state lands. We have $6 million in damages that we're working with FEMA on. And then also huge wildland fire response for our team this past fall. And we're looking at how to continue to prepare and respond in the future. I think that may be it. Yeah. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I talk fast.
It's great. It's exciting that we're 100th anniversary and 1 million visitors.
Yeah, a lot to celebrate.
Pretty important stuff.
We've got a group of really dedicated, passionate team at FBR. It's a pleasure to work with them.
Great. All right. Not seeing any questions. So thank you very much. And as you know, Trevor's your liaison, so we'll follow questions from him as well and be in touch with these guys.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, and next we have Fish and Wildlife. We have two of you or one of you?
My support's gonna be on the bench today. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So Andrea, if you want to introduce yourself for the record, that would be great.
Great. Good morning. My name is Andrea Shortsleeve. I am the current commissioner of the Department of Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And I am joined by Elizabeth Stratton, who is our Director of Business and Administration. I have been a employee of the Fish and Wildlife Department for 8 years now and commissioner for a little over 2 months. So bear with me if thank you. I can't answer all of your questions, but I know the team over here will definitely help. We're just waiting for, technical difficulties. I'll just, yeah. As we wait for everything to pull up, I'm going to go through very similar to my colleagues' presentations, talking about give a department overview, talk about some key changes this year and some significant challenges, and we'll end with discussing our financial restructuring. So I'll just wait for the screen to catch up.
So you guys are the ones that do the calendar, yes? Or is
We do, yeah.
I've gotten one in my mailbox.
That's not good.
I always send them off to my grandchildren.
I need the extra.
Yeah, well.
We'll make sure you get another one. Make a note of that. So those are,
I
yeah,
love those calendars.
beautiful calendars, really beautiful photography.
They're gorgeous. All right, here we are.
Okay, so we can flip down. Yep, just so I gave the outline, we'll just be touching on some key changes and end with our financial restructuring. And so the department mission is the conservation of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont. And our other challenges include providing quality fish and wildlife-based recreation and reaching Vermonters with the best possible information about these resources. And it's a really big mission, it's a big responsibility, but we take it very seriously. And I have a extremely knowledgeable, capable, and passionate staff that I work with. So I'm very, very proud of the people that I work with. Many people are surprised to learn that the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Department includes the conservation of all living things. So we work from bugs to bobcats, mud puppies to maple trees, and we also serve the natural communities and the habitats that all of those species thrive in. It's estimated that there's at least 24,000 species living in Vermont, and our mission is to conserve and protect all of them. Our mission also covers the people of Vermont, and we move on to the next slide. We serve all Vermonters, from hunters and anglers to people who just like to look at wildlife and to know that they're just out there in the woods and the mountains. We work closely with our towns and our communities, and we also provide direct access to landowners looking to improve habitat on their property. And we take our commitment to future generations very seriously, and we work to ensure that we have healthy and thriving wildlife populations for future generations to come. We have approximately 140 full-time employees within the division. 41 of those are within our warden service. We have five divisions in our department. The administration division provides policy, planning, personnel, and financial management for the department. They are in charge of distributing and selling all of our hunting and fishing licenses, and they manage $9 million in federal grants each year. The wildlife department is responsible for the conservation and management of all of the wildlife and plant and habitats. Wildlife plant species and their habitats in Vermont. And that ranges, from managing the deer and moose herds to managing wildlife conflicts with bears, preventing biodiversity loss, And we also manage 135,000 acres of state lands in our wildlife management areas. And we help Commissioner Fitzko and her team manage state forests as well. Our fish division is responsible for the conservation and management of fish and aquatic habitat. Within that division, we also have our fish culture stations who are responsible for the rearing and stocking of trout and other species for restoration and recreational purposes. Yes, sir.
Is there any recommendation to close it? I feel like I'm lacking in emails this second.
We can change that. No, there is no recommendation to close the Salisbury Fish Hatchery currently. As I talk about our financial restructuring, that is part of what we are looking at all of our fish culture stations, all of our infrastructure, and all of our programs on a whole. But we're not going piece by piece.
Joking aside, I think there was sort of a plan to how are we going to deal with the Salisbury Fish Hatchery, because there are some inherent problems with it.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
But no,
But we spent a lot of
plan
time
to
last year. We had a bit of a,
Yeah, a whole book, a couple books on it.
yeah. That's right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. In addition to fish stocking and conservation management fish species, our fish division is also responsible for providing public access to all of our public waterways and access areas. Our wardens, their primary responsibility is providing enforcing conservation law for fish and wildlife laws, but in additional duties which have been accumulating as the years go on. They are also responsible for handling all of the animal cruelty cases within the state. They provide search and rescue services. They are the lead role in recreational boating safety and support the Vermont State Police in most investigations through just personnel and also through our canine services. We have specialized dogs that can help. Yes.
So last year we passed an animal welfare role, and it seemed to me that was going into the Department of Public Safety, right? So are you all working with, because there was sort of a timeline of hiring somebody and making a plan and how it was all going to work, because it was between you and ag. I mean, everybody seemed to have a piece of it, and
Right.
is that happening? Are you?
It's happening. We, I believe that one person was hired to kind of oversee the program, the current responsibilities of addressing the animal cruelty cases and dealing with the animals that are seized still falls within the Fish and Wildlife Department, but we currently are not getting funded to do that.
Yeah, this is probably.
So how'd that discussion go? I mean, we're talking domestic animals, right?
Correct.
Domestic animals?
Correct.
Or why not the Department of Agriculture?
That is a good question.
That was part of last year's conversation, why this bill was created.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is the Agency of Agriculture doesn't have any sworn law enforcement. And so creating another pocket of law enforcement within state government do not seem advisable. That said, there's a recognition that there's some particularized skill sets we do in the sort of interim capacity the wardens are serving in. We do often contact the state veterinarian for assistance. But there was no perfect solution, which I think is back to why they created a position within the Department of Public Safety and asked them to sort of chart a path. As you might imagine, many of these cases have significant other concerns, mental health, general concerns that go well beyond animal welfare.
So how cases are coming, I assume,
Correct.
and they're being paid for out of the Fish and Wildlife Fund?
No,
Sorry.
we received an increase in our base appropriation of $300,000 in last year's budget and allowed us to we sort of rotate vacant warden positions and kind of with a running average of 2 vacancies and instead went down to 1 vacancy, so effectively adding another warden position, and included in that was $50,000 or $80,000 worth of what we termed operating costs, but money for veterinary services, boarding, et cetera, so that money is not coming from Fish and
Covering
Wildlife.
the cost?
It's a general fund.
Covering the cost of
At this point, yes, but part of that is we've been able to also piece together some goodwill gestures from different animal rescue organizations. As you may have heard in the news, there was a particularly significant case regarding a horse farm in southern Vermont, but had good support from local horse rescue organizations. I think there could be challenges. The governor's office, in asking wardens to take on that responsibility, asked for a projection. And we gave them our best estimate, and it was what was reflected in last year's budget. And we are currently operating with those ones.
I can understand why I raised my eyebrows. Thank you.
And our fifth division is our outreach division, and they're responsible for all of our informational and educational programs. They produce all of our publications, all of our promotional work, handle all of our social media, which is a ginormous task, and then also run a number of conservation ed and hunter ed education programs. Each summer, we also run the Green Mountain Conservation Camp, which sees over 900 kids that go through that program every summer. It's a really great program. So similar to my colleagues, here is our overview or budget overview, by program. Overall, our state fiscal 26 budget is just shy of $31.3 million. And this is a net increase of $100 million compared to previous year. On this slide, I just wanted to point out the largest, it looks like the largest portion of our budget is going to the fish division, and that is because it also includes our fish culture stations, which account for $4.6 million. When we look at our overview by fund, our federal funding totals about $10 million. 91% of those federal funds are from Pittman Robinson and Dingle Johnson funds, which are excise taxes on firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, and fishing equipment. 6% of our federal funds come from state wildlife grants that are appropriated annually to address different wildlife conservation needs. And then the final remainder of our federal funds are a combination through the EPA, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program to support our beaver wetland program. Also federal funding to support threatened and endangered species in the Clean Vessel Act. Our federal funds support a large majority of our staff costs. So any reduction in federal funds would result in an inability to pay staff if funding is not replaced. And our federal funds also help fund and support many subgrants to our state partners. In turn, these partners provide the non-federal match requirement. And so this work is also critical to address capacity challenges by our department staff.
Wildlife conservation plan, some of this money depends upon that being updated and in place. Everything good with that? So up to date and everything?
The State Wildlife Action Plan? Yep. So this year is the 10-year. So we are currently in the process of rewriting that. And yes, our federal funding is required for that. So yes, we are in the midst of that. Oops, I would say in addition, I'll just keep on the other side for a minute. Our general funds is another third of our budget, includes about $9.38 million. This is an 11.7% increase since last year. And our special funds include our Fish and Wildlife Fund, which is comprised of all of our license fees, which is another third of our budget, just over $10 million. If we look at budget by our expenses, which is the pie chart on the right, it's very clear that our biggest expenses are seen in the salaries and benefits to the staff, makes up almost 70% of our budget. And then adding in the internal service funds, insurance, workman's comp, HR, and then our ADS allocation, that fund accounts for 8%. We've seen $1.13 million in increase from external pressures from cost of living, benefit rates, and our class RFRs. And so really the take home message, I think, from that pie graph is that the discretionary funds that our department has is only about 4% of our 14% of our budget. And that's what we use to operate our fish culture stations, buy equipment, manage our WMAs, our access areas, and all of that.
So you've had some requests for reclassification.
Correct.
So is, what areas have gotten?
Recently, the wardens have gone through a complete RFR, and that was part of a statewide law enforcement
Oh, yes.
reclassification.
Yep.
And then in previous years, the wildlife division has gone through a reclassification. And fisheries, yeah. So a lot of people.
I think at this point, it's more than 90% of department staff have had 2 years.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Maybe close to done.
Hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, then we can move to the next slide. Just wanted to highlight key expenditure changes this year. As I've mentioned, we had a 1.39 million increase in salaries and benefit costs across all of our funding sources. And we've eliminated, we eliminated $175,000 in costs from dispatching with the Department of Public Safety, and that associated revenue has been removed from their budget as well. After the 2023 storm in July, our annex storage down in Berlin, the building was flooded. And so the department had to secure a new storage space in East Barry using general fund dollars that came from the secretary's office. And that just resulted in a net neutral transfer for the agency. And then finally, we are expecting to see additional savings from the fish division. We have several employees in the fish culture program who are close to retirement, so we expect to see some savings in that area in the future. So looking at our revenue changes, we're seeing stagnant to decreasing revenue sources from our license revenue, motor fuel revenue, and then timber sales. Our license funds are expected to decline by nearly $200,000. Motor fuel receipts will be reduced by $30,000, and then timber sale receipts have been reduced by $73,000, and that's mainly due to staff capacity and the lack of long-range management plans that can help facilitate timber sale process.
So decrease in license sales, is it across the board or fisheries or wildlife, which?
It's, Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's mostly seen in hunting. Well, hunting participation has remained relatively stable. We're really fighting the demographics of the state. And so most of the decrease in sales are seen because we have the lifetime licenses, and the permanent licenses are extremely popular. And then we are also just have a lack of young folks in the state.
I've been worried about that for a long time. When we put those in place, that those would, in the end, cause a problem for fish and wildlife, because especially with the aging population, we get into all demographics of people no longer having to pay. They get a free license every year. And so I see that as a problem we created some years back, right? And so when was the last time you had a fee bill?
Ooh, not recently. I don't know when the last time it was.
2019. I think, and some fees were increased in 2021.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
On the education side, are the conservation camps, are they full at capacity
They
in
are.
the summer, and
Yep.
they're staying pretty stable?
They are pretty stable. I think maybe the older week or the advanced week doesn't always sell out, but pretty much every other week is at capacity.
I worked at one of those like a very long time.
Oh, well, thank you. Were you at Buck Lake or?
I was at Buckley.
Yeah.
16,
Oh, great. Yeah, it's a really nice place.
long time ago.
So this year we'll be utilizing receipts from our Fish and Wildlife Trust, which, speaking to lifetime licenses, this trust was created in 1995 with receipts from the sales of lifetime licenses. And this year, the trust will have an interest balance sufficient to cover any expenditure, cover the revenue losses from lifetime license holder participation, which will be about $225,000. So we'll be utilizing that. In addition to the $1 million increase that we received in general fund dollars this year. We're also receiving $140,000. The department is $140,000 transfer from the secretary's office, and then a $185,000 one-time general fund allocation to help bridge our budget gap.
And the budget gap is due to decline in.
It's, I think more, it's an increase in cost of living and all of those pressures. And then, yes, declining sales. For position changes, just wanted to highlight that this year, Fish Division will reallocate a vacancy at the Salisbury Fish Culture Station supervisor position there to create an assistant land acquisition coordinator position. And we're doing that to utilize funds that are dedicated to focus on land conservation projects for both fish and wildlife. This includes wetland conservation and restoration initiatives in Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog.
So the position is moving and you didn't have any funds associated with it because you didn't have anybody there, or was the money in the budget last year or FY25 for that position? We probably put money in the budget, right?
Oh, that's a good question. I
So it would
would,
be coming out for FY26 out of Salisbury.
I think it was, if I had to guess, it was paid for with state funds mostly. And we would have reallocated those funds to fire out the holes in 26. Yes. That's correct.
Thanks.
yeah, thank you. And then, as we mentioned before, the wardens went through a statewide law enforcement RFR. And so this isn't covered in our base budget, but it will continue to be a base pressure. So touching on significant initiatives and challenges, my colleagues have discussed both Act 59 and Act 181 in their testimony. Both of these acts are requiring a significant amount of experience of time and commitment from the Fish and Wildlife Department. Fish and Wildlife is expected to provide extensive technical expertise, both in the inventory and planning phases of the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 initiative, which it's adding up to equal at least one full-time employee worth of staff time for this effort. And then once we have moved past the planning phase, we will have to extend capacity to support all of the conserved land that we are conserving. In Act 181, the Act 250 reform law, staff will be required to create criteria for impacts on forest fragmentation, ecological connectivity. And this is looking like it will add up to about 1.5 full-time employees worth of time.
So once again, we have, and no money came along with that. So there's expectation that the Fish and Wildlife license holders are gonna have to pony up and provide for these things that are supposedly supposed to help the whole state.
Correct. So yes, unfunded mandates, as you're alluding to, we're getting asked to do more and more conservation work with less and less people paying into the system, which is what we'll talk about in my next slide. We've also been dealing with disaster recovery and response from the previous 2 summers and December of 2024, weather events during those times. The damages have included flooded areas on all of our access areas, our WMA, wildlife management area access roads. And then we sustained content losses at the Salisbury Fish Culture Station when the entire basement flooded, and then the annex storage space, which I discussed earlier. We've had a small number of significant damages that are currently in process and being worked through FEMA mitigation. And then just the growing state lands infrastructure facilities management, just growing expectations and staff time is a continued challenge for this area. And so just I think that this will be the last slide because I'll take questions. We recognize that the current funding model for our department is not working. We are experiencing, like I mentioned, significant and declining revenues that just can't keep pace with our large upward pressures. As Representative LaRoche alluded to, more and more work is being given to the department, and it needs to be being funded by constituents that buy hunting and fishing licenses. We are currently undertaking a financial restructuring. And what that is looking like is we are doing an inventory of our capital needs for the next 10 years, looking at our infrastructure needs, looking at all of the unfunded and funded mandates that we must meet, and then also looking at business models, financial models that other states and conservation organizations are using to see if we can adapt to those. And so I do want to stress that this is a department-wide challenge. It's not specific to one program. And in order to address this, we must take a big picture look and apply it to our entire department. So
So you're looking at the other states, looking at where their funding comes from, but also looking at what is placed on them in terms of mandates to the general conservation work that fairly work that would directly relate to the hunting license sales, and seeing if just see how it shakes out and how other people are doing it.
Yeah.
What seems possible, what seems reasonable, what seems manageable.
Right. Yes.
First of all, thanks for your work.
Thank you.
In staff capacity challenges, at some point, we say you're going to be looking at those. I would like to see what information you get on that, so we can, it's helpful information if we're going to budget realistically.
Okay. Be happy to.
I know the Environment Committee has talked about for years, or, they would take up the issue, or that's where they would take up the issue of licenses and some of these other things that you're talking about.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay. Go on to.
Sure. This is just my last slide. I saw in the instructions that we were asked to provide any programmatic and performance measures if we had any. So I picked three that I feel help tell the story of fish and wildlife. The first one being habitat conserved and otherwise influenced by department efforts, mainly in the regulatory development world. And this year we positively influenced 2,700 acres, which in talking to staff, this metric we measure because it is something that we can measure and compare year to year. But what this shows is that there is actually, there's a lot of fluctuation year to year, and a lot of that's based on staff capacity, but also external factors. So considering the amount of processes that are going, development that's being brought through Act 250, just kind of the external factors that don't really get reported here. But I wanted to highlight it because even though it's not necessarily measured, the work that's done here in the regulatory development world that doesn't get measured, or the relationship building, all of the work that our department does that is unfunded but helps the regulated community move through these processes quicker and faster is quite remarkable, actually. And unfortunately, it doesn't get necessarily covered in this metric. But moving on, wanted to highlight the number of new ADA docks and parking areas that were installed this year, which was 16. It's up from 11 last year. So we have a total of over 30 in the state currently. These fishing access areas are funded through a combination of state and federal sources, including fishing license revenues and then also motorboat registration fees. And it's just another example of how the department is connecting Vermonters to the natural world and providing access to nature for all of our constituents. And then finally, the other performance measure I wanted to highlight was the number of people that go through an in-person department-led program. This year it was 9,563, which is I think an incredible amount of people to go through department-funded programs. And that includes everything from walks, habitat walks, track and scat identification, learning to cook, let's go fishing. If anyone came to the ice fishing festival we had a few weeks ago, really great programs that our department staff all handle. And it's just another example of the value our department, I think, adds to Vermonters.
That's great. And thank you for adding some performance measures and your talk about it is really adding the most important part. This is like, how much did we do? And then there's is anyone better off and how are they better off? And that's what you were just telling us about. So what this means is more people are getting out, they're appreciating the world. Maybe the stress level of Vermont is reducing a little bit as a result of that. Again, we all need to be outside and
Appreciate why we live here.
yeah. And it may bring more people to come to Vermont and appreciate it too. So,
Yes.
any other questions from anybody? Thank you for all you do. We appreciate it. The whole department, you guys play a very important role in the success of Vermont being Vermont. So we appreciate work that you're doing. And Trevor, as you know, is your liaison. So
Yes, very lucky.
okay,
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you for my driver.
No
Take care. Dee, okay. Would you like to explain that,
Sure.
people?
The Agriculture and Affairs Organization is at the State House today. And they asked if they could stop by very briefly. And before we go for lunch. So I told them earlier that we expect to finish our normal testimony between 11:45 and 12. So I can check out the hallway, but my suspicion is they might be available to come in for a few minutes. We do provide, and I don't remember offhand what budget it is, but there is a state
Yeah,
grant
fairs.
for fairs.
Institutions of corrections.
No, well, no, this is a different one. This
Yeah,
is a different thing.
It might be in the ag.
Yeah, and it's like 500,000 or something like that, or five.
Right, but anyhow, they
It's in our budget.
they wanted to just briefly stop by and
Yeah.
introduce themselves. I know there's a contingent of people around the state that are with them, so.
Do you want to pop out and just take a look and I'll talk about a couple
Yeah.
other things while you're
Yeah.
doing that? This afternoon, we have the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. They have said they're only going to need 90 minutes instead of 2 hours. So that means that we should finish by 3. But we're going to keep the legislative but public hearing at 3:45 because everybody's made their plans. So I'm not going to say, oh, now you can come earlier because I think that will dismiss everybody else. So we'll have a little break, but we really need to start right at 3:45. So after we break, if we can be back here by 3:40, and then we'll be ready to go at 3:45. And then tomorrow, just as a reminder, we have the other public hearing from 5 to 6:30, and we'll have a break for about 45 minutes. We have the Green Mountain Care Board now coming in. So we'll have 45 minutes then, but we're also done by 6:30, so it's not too much cutting into the dinner hour. If you need a snack beforehand, bring your snack. You'll have a little time before it if you need to power up before we have public hearing. I'm going to just wait a minute and see if Jim comes back in or if we need to go offline. And then I might as well go through the rest of this. So Friday, we have the Vermont State Colleges and UVM. This is John's day, it's Friday morning. So Public Utility Commission, VSAC. We did not have a reception last night. That was an error. And then DFR, and then we have the afternoon. And Erin, how far into the following week are we going? We have a couple of more on Monday next week.
Yeah, we just have Monday scheduled.
We just have Monday scheduled at this point, and then we'll start in more on markup and.
Monday at 1 or 1:30.
1 o'clock.
Thank you.
And we will, are the same people that were here last Monday able to be here this coming Monday? I don't know, where we should, Dave will be here and John.
I'll be here.
I mean, 2 of us will be here, Wayne, Trevor. Okay, so we have 6, so we're fine on that. For the rest of you that are optional. That's to you. You're optional person or 2. You're not optional on the committee. I'm trying to correct that. You are not optional. You are critical, but your attendance in person is optional. Your almonds are definitely. No, those are required. So Jim, what's the story?
I don't see them. I just texted Jackie and one of their contingent that I happen to have a cell number.
Right, so why don't we go off live and if we can just all hang out, let's go off live.